Between a sudden wave of resignations purging the House and a multi-chamber revolt against an unauthorized war, the 119th Congress is teetering on the edge of a constitutional reset.
That description isn't an exaggeration. It's April 15th, 2026, and if you look at the transcript from yesterday's session, it feels like the floor is moving underneath everyone's feet. This goes beyond policy disagreements. We're witnessing the actual physical makeup of the legislature changing in real time. The demographic and partisan balance of the House is being redrawn by scandal and voluntary exits, rather than at the ballot box.
It started yesterday at 2 p.m. Eastern, when Democratic Representative Eric Swalwell of California officially resigned his seat. His departure was sudden, but the momentum had been building since the San Francisco Chronicle published that exhaustive investigative report last week. The official record shows 2 letters entered into the journal, one to the Speaker of the House, Republican Mike Johnson of Louisiana, and one to California Governor Gavin Newsom to trigger the special election process.
Right. And Swalwell was very specific about the rationale for his exit. He mentioned he wanted to fight what he called false allegations, but he also used the word mistakes in a way that suggests a complicated legal defense ahead. What stands out in the transcript, though, is his warning about the institution itself. He wrote, and I'm quoting here, "Expelling anyone in Congress without due process, within days of an allegation being made, is wrong." He's trying to frame his resignation as a principled stand against a rush to judgment.
That quote really hangs over the chamber because of the timing. Justice Swalwell was walking out the door to avoid becoming a political distraction. An expulsion resolution was being filed against Republican Representative Tony Gonzalez of Texas. That's House Resolution 1172, introduced by Democratic Representative Teresa Leger Fernandez of New Mexico. It puts the leadership in a bind. If they accepted Swalwell's departure as a necessary cleansing, they have to address the allegations against Gonzalez with the same urgency.
And this is where the institutional memory gets interesting, Paige. We've seen ethics investigations take years, sometimes outlasting the member's entire career. But this is moving at light speed. Both members were facing severe misconduct claims, including reports of a Manhattan DA criminal probe in the Gonzalez matter. It's created this incredibly rare moment where both parties are cleaning house simultaneously. But the due process argument Swalwell raised is splitting the caucus in an unusual way. Some argue the House is becoming a place where an unproven headline equals a lost seat.
The internal anxiety is driven by the fact that the math is so tight. If you look at the numbers, with these departures, the House is down to just 431 members. That leaves 217 Republicans and 213 Democrats. There is 1 independent and 4 vacancies. When you are operating on a 4-seat margin, every single resignation functions like a tectonic shift for the leadership's ability to pass anything. Speaker Johnson is essentially governing on a razor's edge.
Exactly. Think of it like a game of Jenga, where you're running out of blocks at the bottom, yet the tower is getting taller. Speaker Johnson is trying to hold a majority together while members are being forced out by scandal. The arithmetic is staggering, but the precedent is perhaps more unsettling. If the House starts expelling members within days of an allegation, as Swalwell warned, the due process norm that has governed the Ethics Committee for decades is effectively dead. We are moving toward a resign or be removed standard that doesn't wait for a jury.
The transcript shows Swalwell essentially saying, "I'm leaving so my constituents aren't distracted," but he's also throwing a flare back over his shoulder at the process. He claimed it was wrong to expel without a full investigation, yet he's leaving before one can finish. It's a strategic paradox. He's trying to protect the seat for his party by preventing a messy floor vote that could hurt Democrats in the midterms.
It's a strategic retreat to save the seat and avoid the public spectacle of a full-floor debate on his personal conduct. But while the House was dealing with its shrinking membership, the focus shifted to a much larger conflict. We are now in Week 7 of what the record shows is becoming a full-scale procedural war over the military engagement in Iran. This isn't just a debate, it's a blockade of the legislative process itself.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer of New York is calling this Operation Epic Failure. Yesterday, he stood on the floor and laid out a sustained, weekly assault on the administration's Iran policy. While the critique of the strategy was sharp, the promise of a procedural marathon is what really changes the landscape. He isn't just asking for a debate, he's vowing to shut down all other Senate business until this is addressed.
Schumer's language was remarkably blunt. He said, Donald Trump promised total and complete victory. Instead, he delivered total and complete chaos. He's framing this as a war of choice that hasn't achieved any of its stated goals. No regime change, no curb on nuclear ambitions, just unstable global markets, and, as he pointed out, gas prices over $4 a gallon in almost every major American market.
And he's putting his Republican colleagues on notice. He said, if Republicans block it, we will vote again and again and again, every single week, until Operation Epic Failure ends or Congress does its job. That it he's referring to is a War Powers Act resolution led by Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois. Since she's a combat veteran, Schumer is leaning heavily on her authority to challenge the commander-in-chief. It's a very deliberate attempt to shield the move from unpatriotic labels.
This aligns with a make-them-own-it strategy. By forcing a vote every week, the Democrats are making every Republican senator go on the record over and over as gas prices climb and the costs of the naval blockade mount. Speaking of costs, over in the House, Democratic Representative Joe Courtney of Connecticut brought some staggering numbers to the floor. He cited the real-time war cost tracker from Brown University's Costs of War project, which has become the gold standard for these metrics.
Courtney's speech was a deep dive into how this conflict impacts the average person. He stated that as of yesterday morning, American consumers have paid $19.9 billion in added energy costs because of the tension in the Strait of Hormuz. He even broke it down to his local district, saying gas in Enfield, Connecticut hit $4.29. But his most serious point was that the House is being treated as a mere formality, rather than a co-equal branch of government.
Right. The blockade. Courtney pointed out that the president announced a naval blockade of Iranian ports, specifically targeting Bandar Abbas, without any allied support or congressional approval. He then pulled a quote from the current Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, Republican Marco Rubio of Florida. Back in January, Rubio told the Senate, a blockade is an act of war. Courtney is using the administration's own words to prove they've bypassed the Constitution.
That marks the core of the conflict. The administration's own top diplomat has defined this as an act of war, yet Courtney argues the House is being bypassed while the administration prepares to ask for $200 billion in emergency war funding. He used a great James Madison quote to ground the argument. The Constitution supposes that the executive is the branch of power most interested in war and most prone to it. It's a reminder that this isn't a new fight. It's a 250-year-old one.
This represents a fundamental power struggle between the branches. You have 13 American soldiers dead, hundreds injured, and the USS Gerald Ford out on its 294th day of deployment. Courtney was very clear. This body is not and should not be a rubber stamp that forces the cost onto taxpayers for war decisions which were made outside the law. He's trying to bridge the gap between the constitutional theory and the fact that a farmer in Connecticut is paying $6 for diesel to run a tractor.
It's interesting how Courtney and Schumer are hitting the same notes. Schumer is focusing on the strategy-free nature of the mission, while Courtney is focusing on the unilateral nature of the execution. They are both trying to force the GOP to either authorize this war or stop it. But while they're fighting over a war abroad, the House actually managed a rare moment of near total unity on a different kind of safety.
You're talking about the Alert Act. This was a 396-10 vote. For the 119th Congress, a margin like that is basically a miracle. We're looking at H.R. 7613, the Airspace Location and Enhanced Risk Transparency Act of 2026. It's a direct response to that horrific mid-air collision over D.C. in January of 2025.
That crash killed 67 people, everyone on an American Airlines flight and an Army Black Hawk. Republican Representative Sam Graves of Missouri, who chairs the Transportation Committee, led the debate. He was very somber. He pointed out that the NTSB found the root cause was the FAA's placement of a helicopter route too close to a runway approach path, a flaw that had been flagged by pilots for years before the tragedy.
There's a specific technical detail in the record that is just haunting. Graves noted that if the aircraft had been equipped with ADS-B-in technology, which provides pilots with a cockpit display of surrounding traffic, the pilots would have had 59 seconds of warning. Imagine that. Almost a full minute to react. Instead, because the FAA had delayed the mandate for this technology as part of their next-gen modernization, the pilots had zero warning.
And the bill fixes this. It mandates that by 2031, almost all aircraft operating in controlled airspace must have this collision avoidance tech. It also permanently closes Helicopter Route 4 along the Potomac River. Democratic Representative Rick Larson of Washington, the ranking member, called it Alert Act version 7.0. He was emphasizing how much they've refined this bill after talking to the victims' families, making it one of the most vetted pieces of safety legislation in a decade.
But even with that 396-vote success, there's a sense of what's the catch? As the House finished this aviation safety push, the Senate just placed S-4280 on its legislative calendar. That's the FISA reauthorization bill. So we go from a bipartisan success on physical safety in the air to what looks like a massive partisan collision over surveillance and digital privacy.
It's the classic congressional trade-off. One day you're voting to save lives from plane crashes. The next you're debating how much the government should be allowed to look at your digital life. The record shows the FISA bill was read for the second time yesterday, which means the clock is officially ticking for a floor fight over the controversial Section 702, which allows the collection of communications from non-citizens abroad.
It's a pivot from the safety of the skies to the safety of our data. But there's one more safety issue in the record that feels like a scene from a movie, and it involves the oldest member of the Senate, who is showing no signs of slowing down his oversight role.
Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa. He's 92 years old, and he is currently in a high-stakes standoff with UBS, the global bank that recently swallowed up Credit Suisse. He's investigating Nazi-era accounts, specifically accounts that belong to Nazis and their facilitators during and after World War II, and how that money might have moved through the Swiss banking system for decades.
Grassley is legendary for his oversight, but he sounds genuinely fed up in this transcript. He accused UBS of shifting from collaborative to obstructionist the moment he announced a formal committee hearing. He mentioned a Mr. Borofsky, the lead investigator, who says UBS is now withholding privileged materials. The scale of the data they are hiding is what's really shocking.
They really are playing with fire. Grassley said that, while UBS claimed they were only withholding about 150 documents, it turns out those documents were actually clusters of thousands of pages each. As of mid-March, there are approximately 23,000 pages of material that have been redacted or entirely withheld from the Senate investigators. That is a massive black hole in a historical inquiry.
23,000 pages. And Grassley had this great, very Grassley line. He said this senator was born at night, but not last night. UBS needs to quit playing games and get the job done right away. He's also furious that the bank took legal action against the Simon Wiesenthal Center, which he called a threat to First Amendment rights and an attempt to silence the primary researchers into Holocaust-era financial crimes.
The moral weight he's putting on this is heavy. He said, after all, the information about Nazi evils belongs to humanity. He's particularly bothered that UBS set an arbitrary deadline of July 31st to end the investigation. He's essentially saying they are trying to wait him out, to let the clock run out on the inquiry into the looting of Jewish assets, while they wait for a less tenacious senator to take over his subcommittee.
He's also reminding them of their status. He pointed out that because they recently got a national bank charter in the U.S., they have a heightened responsibility to be transparent. It's a fascinating look at how institutional memory works. Grassley remembers the original investigations into these banks from the 1990s, and he's not letting the new corporate owners sweep the history under the rug just because the leadership has changed.
He's promising another hearing before the end of the year. It's a reminder that while most of the Hill is looking at the 2026 elections or the war in Iran, some offices are still looking at justice that's been delayed for 80 years. It's a quiet kind of authority that you only get from someone who has been in that seat since the 1980s and has outlasted a dozen different bank CEOs.
It's the ultimate long game. Grassley versus the Swiss banking system. My money is on the guy who's been doing oversight since before most of the current House members were born. But speaking of things that look toward the future and potential exits, we have a kicker today that is a bit of a bombshell hidden in the fine print of the daily bill introductions.
If you look at the list of bills introduced yesterday, you'll see H.R. 8275. It was introduced by Democratic Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland, along with a huge coalition of co-sponsors. The title is the Commission on Presidential Capacity to Discharge the Powers and Duties of Office Act. This isn't just a symbolic gesture, it's a direct invocation of Section 4 of the 25th Amendment.
Wait, that's the mechanism that allows Congress to set up a permanent body to determine if a president is actually fit to serve, right? Usually we think of the cabinet making that call, but the Constitution actually gives Congress the power to create an alternative body.
Exactly. Instead of relying on the cabinet, who are appointed by the president and might have a conflict of interest, this bill would create a permanent commission of medical experts and former executive branch officials to do it. Raskin has introduced versions of this in previous sessions, but looking at the list of co-sponsors yesterday, it's dozens of members, including some very influential committee chairs.
The timing is what makes it feel so urgent. It suggests that as the war tensions rise and the House membership shrinks, some in Congress are thinking very seriously about a constitutional exit ramp. They are building the infrastructure for a scenario they hope never happens, but they want it ready just in case the executive branch enters a crisis that the cabinet can't or won't solve.
It's a break glass in case of emergency bill, but they're not just looking for the hammer. They're trying to build the glass box. It's a quiet introduction on a day filled with resignations and war resolutions. But in the long run, it might be the most significant piece of paper filed yesterday. It shows a Congress that is deeply worried about the stability of the other branch.
It's the ultimate why it matters moment. We are watching the legislature try to shore up its own membership through resignations and its own power through war powers resolutions and capacity commissions. The 119th Congress is clearly trying to find its footing in a very unstable era.
That's Floor Notes for today. We'll be watching to see how the Speaker manages that shrinking 4-seat margin as the FISA fight begins.
We'll see you next time the gavel drops. Stay informed out there.